I don't know why, but I always enjoyed listening to Christmas carols. Maybe it's due to their connection with my favorite season, or maybe they're just good songs, I don't know. But with that said, if I had to pick my favorite, I will probably have to go with Good King Wenceslas. After all, it's very well known, even being sung by the soldiers in the Christmas truce. But to specify, when I said Good King Wenceslas, I meant that I like the translated Czech version, not the English one. But wait, hold on. Translated into Czech? Isn't Wenceslas a Czech king? Yeah, he is. Well, not this one, or this one, or this one, not any of them. In fact, the king we call the Good King Wenceslas, or also known as Saint Wenceslaus, the patron saint of Czech lands, lived in the 10th century and was the first king of Bohemia ever to be called Wenceslaus. But I digress. Now that we know which Wenceslaus of Bohemia the song is talking about, why isn't the original carol in Czech? Well, for that we will have to do some extensive digging, as the answer isn't as simple as you may think. So to start off with, we will have to skip Saint Wenceslaus' actual life in the 10th century, as the origin of the carol surprisingly doesn't start with him. It was in fact during the High Middle Ages, around the early 13th century, when the melody and the trochaic meter of the song was created. But it wasn't a Christmas carol. It was a Latin spring song called Tempus Adis Floridum, which talked about blooming flowers and the coming of warmth right after the frost of winter. The song wasn't written down for much of its early existence, so no one really knows where it came from, but this is how it sounded like.
Tempus adis floridum surdunamque flores, vernales in omnibus imitantur mores.
So pretty much very similar to Wenceslaus' carol today, just with different words. Continuing on from there, Tempus Adis Floridum was finally written down in Finland around the 16th century into a book called Piae Cantiones. This book, which was a collection of multiple medieval songs, eventually found its way to England, where in the 19th century it came into the hands of John Mason Neale. He was known in England as a devout Christian, hymn writer, and especially a hymn translator of Old Latin medieval texts. And this is where Tempus Adis Floridum comes into play, as he's the one who took the melody of that song and used it for a Christmas song he wrote called Good King Wenceslas. He then published this song in 1853, which was met with mixed results. However, over time it became one of the most well-known Christmas carols, not just in the English-speaking world, but also in the rest of Europe. So when does Czech come into play to any of this? Well, if you look closely on the Wikipedia article for the Good King Wenceslas carol, there's a sentence mentioning that according to older Czech sources, Neale's lyrics are a translation of a poem by Czech poet Vaclav Alois Svoboda, written in Czech, German and Latin. Why those three languages, you ask? Well, because Bohemia was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and if you wrote something in Czech, you also had to write it at least in German and Latin so other people in the empire could read it. But I digress again. Continuing on from there, in true Wikipedia fashion, when you click the source for this sentence, the page doesn't exist. Does this mean that the Czechs just made this up so they could lay some sort of a hypothetical claim to a popular English Christmas carol about their old king? Well, that's what I thought after googling for the original poem written by Vaclav and only coming across numerous pages like this one on Duolingo, where even people from Czech Republic were unable to find the original poem. With my luck being no different, I was almost about to decide that the poem was just made up Czech propaganda and leave it at that. But then I came across this book written in Czech in 1902, where on the page 208 the writer complains about Vaclav not getting any credit for writing the original Good King Wenceslas poem in 1847, which would be 6 years before Neale's publication of his carol. The writer goes on to cite his source, where he names the poem in German Sankt Wenzel und Podivini, which means Saint Wenceslas and Podivini? Whatever that is. But now I have the source, so I can just plug this into Google and find the original. Well, turns out no. Because even mighty Google has no idea what this source means. Even if you just put in the supposed German name of the poem, nothing turns out. So now I'm back to square one, as the Austrian, Czech, German and Oxford Online Library archives, along with Google, turn out nothing when you type in the supposed name of the poem outside of that one book that is referencing it. But at this point, I'm not willing to give up just yet. I decided to change my approach from searching just for the poem to searching for the author of the poem. Although at that moment, I realized I completely forgot to address the problem every Austro-Hungarian scholar faces, and that is multiple names and variations of names for one thing. So when it came to the author of our supposed poem, turns out he had 15 plus different variations of his name. These variations weren't large, but when dealing with library databases, a single letter change can make a big difference. Plus, the author's first name, Vaclav, is Czech name for which the English Wenceslas is derived from. So I'm searching for a poem with a king named Wenceslas and the writer named Wenceslas. Or Wenceslas and Vaclav? Or Vaclav and Vaclav? Nein, heißt Wenzel. Nie ma na imię Vaclav. Nem a nebe Wenceslaus. Huh? Čo tu všetci robíte? Let's go back to the drawing board. Now we know there's multiple variations for not just the name of the author, but also the poem, so we could have just been searching for the bad variation of the poem's name. I quickly write out some plausible name variations and go back to the aforementioned online databases. I still have no luck finding the exact poem, but I do find numerous amounts of writings mentioning or referencing the 1847 Wenceslaus poem. I also find that Podivin isn't a weird German word, but an actual name of King's favorite servant in the 10th century. I even managed to find the bookkeepings of either a Prague-based publisher or just a bookseller selling the Sankt Wenceslaus und Podivin poem for 10 Austro-Hungarian crowns in 1847. Now finally convinced the actual poem exists, I'm poised to finally find it. So at this point, it's time to turn to my last plan, which is searching for all the different variations of the author's name and then looking if one of the works that come up is the Good King Wenceslas poem. I go to the Austrian National Library first, and nothing. I then go to the Czech National Library, and after a few tries of different name variations, I finally find the Czech and German version of the poem. But I can't see them, because there's no digitized version. I can however schedule a meeting and fly to Prague to see the works with my own eyes. Apparently. This is so weird. You complain for a Czech not getting credit for creating the original Good King Wenceslas poem, but then hide the actual original poems from anyone reading it. You don't have to take pictures of the originals if it will ruin them. At least write them down on a blog post or something so we can at least see what the original poem says. Unless it doesn't actually exist. Yes, there are many references citing the poem, but we never seen the original. Maybe this is just a weird cycle where everybody references something that doesn't actually exist. And it got to such a point that Czech National Library mentions the poems under the writer's creations without really looking if they actually have them. Brushing it off as in, oh, it's in just an old pile of books somewhere, maybe. No, that would be crazy. That would never happen, right? Well, actually, in this case it didn't happen. How do I know? Because even though I haven't seen the original poem, a week later I managed to find an 1847 Austrian yearbook for teachers, parents and educators, which, along with math problems and other things that teachers would like, has the German version of the Václav Alois Svoboda Sankt Wenceslaus und Podivin poem published that same year. Now finally that we have the poem, we can look if Neil actually just translated Václav's poem or created his own song. What we can say for sure just from the first look is that Neil didn't just straight up translate the poem into English and that was that. This is because Neil's carol has only 5 stanzas, whereas Václav's poem has 3 verses together numbering in 26 stanzas. Plus Neil's carol has an alternative rhyming scheme as opposed to Václav's poem, which has 2 different rhyming schemes, starting with a couplet which then switches into an alternate. This means without alterations, Václav's poem couldn't even be sung to the Good King Wenceslas tune. However, when you start looking at the context of the poem, that's where things get interesting. Both works start off with a clear moonlit night with snow on the ground, both have a king looking out of his window, both have the king spotting some poor person / people struggling in the winter night, both have the king deciding he needs to help the said poor person / people, both have a servant helping the king carry wine, food and wood to the poor person / people, both have the servant struggling to move any longer in the cold, and both have the king telling the servant to walk in his footsteps as it will be easier for him. In conclusion, it seems too coincidental for there to be so many similarities between these 2 works. Therefore, it's safe to say that Neil definitely took the story of Good King Wenceslas from Vaclav's poem. After that, he shortened it, altered it to fit the tune, and published it without crediting or even mentioning Vaclav at all. So next time when you hear the Good King Wenceslas carol, you'll know it's a story about a 10th century Bohemian king from a 19th century Czech poet, altered by an English hymn writer to fit a 13th century spring tune. I have promised for a while now that I'll do a Q&A when I reach 10k subscribers, and since it looks like I should reach that milestone in January, I've decided that my January video is going to be a Q&A. So if you want to ask me a question, there's a link to a Google form in the description. Please don't leave your questions in the comments section or on Twitter. I will only answer the questions from the Google form. I hope you enjoyed my Christmas special video. Please consider supporting me on Patreon, and also I have a YouTube history podcast with Cogito you can listen to. Merry Christmas.